WGBR News Talk 1150. It is time for Newsmakers on this rainy Monday morning. I'm Carol Bowden, and so glad that you could join us. But I am thrilled to have two people in the studio with me this morning that they were just so gracious to not only come in quickly for a scheduled date that they weren't planning, but they came in on a Monday morning, and that's Officer Dwayne Bevell with the Goldsboro Police Department Investigative Division. I hope I'm saying that right, Dwayne.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I did good. And Assistant District Attorney Matthew Delbridge. And gentlemen, thank you. This is really a treat, and cannot tell you how much I appreciate you being in here this morning.
It's really welcome.
Well, the trial's over. Everybody knows what trial it is. It was the McLaurin Murder Trial. And what's the first thought that comes to your mind, Dwayne?
Closure. Closure for the family. That's what we were seeking initially out the gate, was recovery of Kennedy and closure on the case.
And Matt, for you?
It was just a sense of relief that the justice was done, and just really thankful the process worked this time.
This was the first criminal case that I ever sat in and listened to, or trial, I should say, and certainly the biggest thing that I've ever participated in from a trial standpoint, but I only dealt with it for a couple of weeks. You guys dealt with it for a year and a half. Tell me what that was like. Dwayne, you can go first.
It was a very complex case. When you start a case off, you don't have a crime scene, you don't have, in this case, a body, you don't have a weapon. There's a lot to deal with. You have a lot of evidence to deal with, and eventually your offenders, your witnesses, and your family to deal with for 18 months. Once you start getting closer to your actual trial date, you got to make sure all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed and everything's ready to go. It was a complex case to prepare and a very complex case to present. This is where Mr. Delbridge came in and put all the pieces together and made it so obviously a jury could understand it and make the right decision.
And I think that one of the things that I was most impressed with in listening to you and getting to know you over that 2-week period is you had so much to sift through of what was real, what was perceived, and what was a lie. And I mean, you did a great job with that, but how in the world? Is that just something that's a testimony to the training that you've had, or a sixth sense, or what? I mean, because you had a lot to sift through.
Well, thank you, Carol. I appreciate the vote of confidence there. I think Mr. Delbridge said it more appropriately when he said, in his opening remarks, we will try this case old school. And that's what it was. It was old school police work. You didn't have the DNA. You didn't have the ballistics. You didn't have all the evidence that you have on CSI. You didn't have all these things you see on TV. It was good old-fashioned police work.
Well, and that did stick out. So, Matt, your turn. You know, the rest of us just kind of, as outsiders, looked at this thing for a couple of weeks, but 18 months for you. What was that like, preparing for it and knowing that you had to have everything, which you're used to doing, but this was complex?
Probably the most difficult aspect of this was trying to make a determination as to who was going to be tried and for what, because to hold all four people accountable, there had to be concessions made, there had to be some arrangements and deals, and it was difficult to broker all that and yet to reach an outcome where the most responsible person was held the most accountable, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Well, I am so impressed with our police department and our district attorney's office. You guys, you just make Goldsboro proud because it was the right outcome. And this brings me to my next question because, Dwayne, you and I talked at one point. Court was at ease for quite some time, and I think we talked for at least 30 minutes. And one of the most compelling things that you told me was that as the trial was getting ready to be turned over to those 12 men and women, they literally got a 10-minute crash course in the law and were given extensive detail. I think it was about 10 pages of what they had to make certain that they came to a conclusion on. And that gave you concern because you've done this for 18 months. Like you said, you made certain every I was dotted, every T was crossed, and now you're turning it over to a jury of their peers, which is what the law states, but they're not experts. And, Can you expand on that just a little bit for our listeners?
I think you explained it pretty good. Being a juror is a tremendous responsibility. People get the letter in the mail and they go, "Oh no, I have to be a juror." I don't think they understand exactly what that entails when they come in there and they sit in judgment on a case. Like you said, you get a crash course in what the law is. These jurors in particular were bombarded with 2 weeks worth of testimony, witness testimony, that they had to decide truth from fiction, what they believed, what was right and what was wrong, what was morally right, what was ethically wrong. And at that point, they were tasked and charged with what the law is and an understanding of the law. They're taught that elements of the law in addition to hearing and understanding the facts of the case. It's a tremendous responsibility.
It is that. Now, were you at any time, either one of you, concerned when we left the courtroom at around 6 o'clock that Friday evening and we're told we'd come back Monday? At that point, did you have a feeling of, oh, wow, it's not going the way we want, or are you used to that?
Well, pardon me. I can tell you, based upon my experience, the more serious the case, the longer that a jury is out, usually would indicate that there's going to be a guilty verdict at some point, because they do take the time and they want their verdict to be well reasoned, and I think that was exactly what happened here in this case. There was no rush. They wanted to be sure, because the consequences were severe, and I think that's why they took the time that they needed to come to the conclusion that was appropriate.
So for you, it wasn't a concern for you. You felt actually confident that they were taking that time.
Absolutely. I never want to hear a knock at the jury door within an hour of a case going back to decide a homicide case.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel that the jury process is adequate, or do you feel that there need to be changes?
I absolutely do. I think it's the best system there is. And when people who aren't schooled, so to speak, with the law hear all these technical definitions and requirements about what they need to do, all that's really secondary to the way they feel. I tell a jury, you're going to vote with your heart, not your mind, and they can take anything and justify a verdict one way or another. So they want to do what's right, and that's what's important. And I think it works.
For both of you, how do you deal with the family in this particular situation? And by that I mean the family of Kennedy McLaurin Jr., because I saw every single day that you went over there and spoke words to them, and obviously you're going to be giving updates or just talk about proceedings that have happened, but at the same time you get emotionally attached, I would think.
You definitely get emotionally attached to the family, to the case, the outcome of the case. I try to look at it as, how would I want to be treated if this was my child who was missing? I have a very deep faith, Christian belief, and that helps. I turn to him and ask him what I need to do and how I should pursue a case, and he helps out tremendously, being my Lord.
I can't imagine that you could go through this without having a strong faith.
You're absolutely right, Carol. A lot of things didn't come out in the case. A lot of case facts didn't come out. I will say the Sunday that everything started happening, I was in church, and I'd been beating this case to death, beating it around in my head, in pursuit of the truth for about a week, chasing down these bad leads. And that Sunday in church, I asked him, I said, I give it to you, you take it. I give this case, you direct me. And now that's when I got the phone call, per the actual testimony that led me in the right direction, which led me to Leonard Joyner. So I give him the glory for the case. He answered my questions.
Yeah,
yes.
That was the turning point.
Absolutely.
Matt, for you, was there ever any doubt?
Oh, absolutely. Without any forensic evidence and the dependency on co-defendants' statements, and the fact that each statement, there was a variation between each defendant each time they said something and between each other. So unless the jury knew based in their heart that this was the right thing to do, they could easily justify a not guilty verdict, because there were just so many conflicts in the evidence. So, yes, this was a coin flip in some respects.
Wow, what about for you, Dwayne?
Once I got on the right road, a criminal investigator, you don't go out trying to prove someone's guilt. You go out trying to discover the truth of a case. And once I started getting to the truth of the case and understanding the actual facts instead of the fiction, and found all the players in the case.
There were some people that probably haven't been recognized throughout this entire case and trial. Wanted to give you a chance to give them some recognition, some folks that maybe gave you a lot of help.
Well, first and foremost, every officer at the police department, we had this hotline set up, 24-hour hotline. It was manned by patrol officers, and every shift chipped in, handed out flyers, assisted with area checks, did everything they could. In addition to the police department, some outside agencies were implemental, if that's a real word. RMAC Search and Rescue, RMAC Search and Recovery, they assisted. We searched the rivers on boat and in the air. Sheriff's Department lended their helicopter, as well as a lot of other resources, and were always available when we needed them to go out into the county, because it was a multi-jurisdictional investigation. The SBI lab, SBI operatives who came out and assisted in the recovery, and also NECMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They sent a representative down and assisted with some resources, and were willing to help whenever we needed them to.
That was a big weight lifter off of your shoulders, especially after all that you went through in the first few days.
Absolutely. They assisted in actually organizing and setting up the command post. And had some great ideas, which ultimately panned out.
Well, that's fantastic. All right, Matt, go.
The reason I'm here and I'm doing this interview is for one reason, and that is to tell the community about Dwayne Bevell. I have never been involved in a case where anybody has invested their heart and mind and soul in solving a case like this young man has done in this particular matter. Cases like this don't get solved usually. This was a case where the police department didn't even get involved until 48 hours after the incident. This person just vanished. There's absolutely no crime scene. There was no evidence to go on. This man just had to take the bull by the horns and get every resource available and get to the bottom of it. And he got so many false leads. I know when we went, he had gotten to the point he was telling the jury about going to the first burial site and thinking that he was going to recover this young man's body and take it to his mother. And to have that excavation done and there was no body, I don't know how he did it. He is the man.
Well, I have to second that, and you've worked with him for a lot longer. You've been, as you said, in while we were off the air, you've been with the district attorney's office for well over 30 years, and I don't know how long you've worked with Dwayne here since he's still a baby, but
I've got 15 years at the police
15 years. But how do you look so young? You still look like you're 15.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. But just watching the determination and, like you said, the heart and soul that he put into it was, I was just extremely impressed throughout the entire process with both of you. And especially seeing the compassion that you showed towards the family. Professionalism, compassion, I can go on singing both your praises. But let me ask you this. Let's swing back to, what this case was about and the 4 young men whose lives were also completely changed, and their families as well. Do you think that the outcome of this case could possibly serve as a deterrent for young men out there, young men and women who are looking at this type of life? And is it possible that this is a deterrent?
I think it's certainly possible. That type of question, we'll never know the answer because those people who are deterred, of course, do not commit any further crimes. So there's no way to really quantify it. But for the number of people who continue to do these heinous acts, obviously punishment is not a deterrent, and it never will be. And since the beginning of mankind, this type of behavior has been, just a scourge on our society. And we just have to do what we can to try to suppress that criminal element. It puts us all at risk. One
other question that I really wanted to get both of you to answer if I could. obviously, we carried this story for the length of the trial and before, when everything was being found out, on Goldsboro Daily News. And when we posted the verdict, we got so many tremendous positive responses towards both of you and the city and the Goldsboro Police Department. But we also had those odd comments from people that didn't believe in the verdict, didn't think that it was the right decision by the jury. What do you say to those people?
Without actually knowing what these comments would be in the negative about the verdict, I would assume and think it'd be more of a self-defense issue. And I'm a firm believer in self-defense. People have the right to defend themselves, their family, and their property. There's no doubt in my mind about that right. However, when you look at the totality of this case and the facts surrounding this case, the threat was over. And you've got a defenseless young man in the front seat of a car being set on. He is no threat. They made a very poor decision, and that decision changed their lives as well as his in the negative. So I would say this was not a self-defense case. By no means, and I say the jury got it right. They didn't see it as self-defense. And these young men made a decision to turn left instead of right. And that was a wrong decision. And that's why we have a guilty verdict for murder, first degree and second degree.
I think that was very well said. Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
I think those people have a question. If they'd sat in that courtroom and heard the evidence, where the defendant in this case, while he was transporting this ultimate victim out of town in a car, who was helpless, defenseless, had been disarmed, had probably been shot at that point, calls one of his buddies and tells him, "Get a shovel." If that doesn't seal the deal, I don't know what would.
That was a very poignant moment in court when you said that, and so I can't agree with you more. Did you have the opportunity to interact with any of the defendants' families as well, or is that not something that happens within your process?
I have had some interaction with some of the family, just based on the totality of the case, and obviously with some of the testimony that came out, I was making contact with family members of the defendants. So I have had some both before and after the verdict.
Is that just as difficult as dealing with Kennedy's family?
It is. It is. They've lost a son for 10, 15 years or the rest of their life. So it's the same type of circumstances when dealing with the family.
You know, one thing that I was impressed with, and we did have a moment to talk about this during the 2-week time, was how intense and how completely different each interview was with the defendants that you did, Dwayne. You read that person and knew exactly how you needed to approach him in the interview process there at the police department. Is that something that you've learned over the years, or is that just kind of a natural thing?
I guess that goes back to some of that good old-fashioned police work that we spoke about earlier. You know, I'm not proud of the way I have to talk and some of the things I have to say, but you have to be able to communicate with people on a level that they're comfortable with. And that would explain some of the different techniques, some of the different forms of communication that were used.
Well, you did the job. And gentlemen, unfortunately our time is getting ready to come to a close, and so I want to give you a couple of seconds here if there's anything else that you want to say, but I also want to thank you both for sharing your time with us this morning.
This isn't a situation where I think you would want to wait and see Dwayne Bevell out in public and go up and congratulate him. I think you should seek him out and thank him for the job he did.
Well said. Assistant District Attorney Matt Delbridge, Officer Dwayne Bevell, thank you so much for joining us. Hey, go out and make it a great day.